For centuries, kings ruled Europe with absolute power. Their word was law, and their authority was rarely questioned. But in 1789, everything changed. A revolution began in France that would overthrow a powerful monarchy, shake the foundations of Europe, and inspire millions across the world. This was more than a fight for power. It was a struggle for liberty, equality, and the rights of ordinary people. The French Revolution transformed politics forever and became one of the most important events in human history. But every revolution has a beginning. To understand why France exploded into revolution, we must first travel back to the 18th century. At that time, France was one of Europe's richest and most influential kingdoms. Its powerful army, flourishing culture, and magnificent cities made it the envy of the continent. At the heart of the kingdom stood the Palace of Versailles, where King Louis XVI and the royal court lived in extraordinary luxury. The palace dazzled visitors with its grand halls, beautiful gardens, priceless artwork, and extravagant celebrations. But beyond the palace gates, a very different France existed. Millions of ordinary people struggled every day to afford bread, pay heavy taxes, and provide for their families. While the wealthy enjoyed comfort and privilege, the poor carried the burden of the kingdom. With every passing year, the gap between rich and poor became even greater. Yet challenging the king was almost unthinkable. France was ruled under an absolute monarchy. King Louis XVI believed his authority came from God, and his decisions could not easily be questioned. For generations, this system remained in place. But beneath the surface, frustration was growing. French society was divided into three groups known as the Three Estates. The first estate consisted of the clergy. The second estate was made up of the nobility. Together, these privileged classes owned much of the nation's wealth and enjoyed special rights. The third estate included everyone else. Farmers, workers, merchants, craftsmen, and the growing middle class. They represented nearly 98% of the population. Yet they paid almost all the taxes that kept the kingdom running. By the 1780s, France was facing a serious financial crisis. Years of expensive wars and extravagant royal spending had emptied the national treasury. The government owed enormous amounts of money and struggled to pay its debts. Instead of reducing royal expenses or increasing taxes on the wealthy, the burden continued to fall on the common people. For farmers and workers, life became harder with each passing year. Food prices continued to rise. Bread, the most important food for ordinary families, became too expensive for many to afford. Long lines formed outside bakeries as people waited for hours, hoping to buy even a single loaf. Many returned home empty-handed. Hunger spread across towns and villages. As frustration grew, many people began asking the same question. Why should ordinary citizens suffer while the privileged continued to live in luxury? At the same time, a new way of thinking was spreading across Europe. Writers and philosophers challenged the old system. Thinkers like Voltaire, Montesquieu, and Jean-Jacques Rousseau argued that freedom, equality, and justice should belong to everyone. Their books inspired thousands of educated French citizens. People slowly began believing that governments should serve the people, not the other way around. Another event gave the French even greater confidence. Across the Atlantic Ocean, the American colonies had successfully fought for their independence. French soldiers who returned from America brought back powerful new ideas about liberty and democracy. These ideas spread rapidly throughout France. By now, the country faced economic hardship, rising food prices, growing inequality, and a population demanding change. King Louis XVI could no longer ignore the crisis. In 1789, he made a decision that would unknowingly change history forever. For the first time in 175 years, the Estates General would be called together. No one realized that this meeting would become the beginning of the French Revolution. On May 5, 1789, representatives from across France gathered at the Palace of Versailles for the Estates General. It was the first meeting of its kind in 175 years. The king hoped the assembly would solve France's financial crisis. Instead, it would ignite a revolution. The Estates General was divided into three groups. The first estate represented the clergy. The second estate represented the nobility. The third estate represented almost everyone else in France. Although the third estate represented nearly 98% of the population, each estate received only one vote. This meant the first and second estates could easily outvote the third estate, even though they represented only a small part of the population. The representatives of the third estate demanded a fairer system. They wanted every representative to have an individual vote instead of voting by estate. The king and the privileged classes refused. Tensions inside the meeting continued to grow. Finally, on June 17, 1789, the representatives of the Third Estate made a historic decision. They declared themselves the National Assembly. For the first time, they claimed they represented the people of France, not the king. 3 days later, they arrived for another meeting. But the doors were locked. Many believed King Louis XVI was preparing to dissolve the assembly by force. Refusing to surrender, the representatives gathered inside a nearby indoor tennis court. There, they made one of the most famous promises in history. They swore they would never separate until France had a new constitution. This became known as the Tennis Court Oath. The revolution had officially begun. Across France, news of the oath spread rapidly. Hope grew among ordinary people. But fear also spread through the royal court. Neither side knew it yet, but within weeks, the streets of Paris would explode into violence. By the summer of 1789, tension filled the streets of Paris. Food remained expensive, unemployment was rising, and rumors spread that the king was gathering troops around the capital. Many feared that the National Assembly would be destroyed by force. Ordinary citizens believed they had to act before it was too late. On the morning of July 14, 1789, thousands of people gathered in Paris. Their destination was the Bastille. The Bastille was an old fortress and prison that symbolized royal power. Although only a few prisoners remained inside, the fortress represented the authority of the king. The crowd demanded weapons and gunpowder stored within its walls. At first, negotiations began peacefully. But soon, violence erupted. Gunfire echoed through the streets as citizens and soldiers clashed outside the fortress. For hours, the battle continued. Finally, the Bastille fell. The crowd entered the fortress, marking one of the most important moments in French history. News of the victory spread rapidly across France. For ordinary people, the fall of the Bastille meant more than the capture of a prison. It was a symbol. For the first time, the people had challenged the power of the king and won. The French Revolution was no longer an idea. It had become reality. Across the countryside, fear and unrest spread. Many peasants attacked symbols of feudal power and destroyed old records of taxes and privileges. The old system that had ruled France for centuries was beginning to collapse. Only weeks later, another historic decision would change France forever. The National Assembly declared that all men were born free and equal in rights. The Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen became one of the revolution's greatest achievements. Liberty, equality, and the rights of citizens would become the new ideals of France. But the revolution was far from over. More dramatic events were still to come. Although the revolution had begun, the people of France were still suffering. Food remained scarce, and the price of bread continued to rise. In Paris, frustration reached a breaking point. On October 5, 1789, thousands of women marched through heavy rain toward the Palace of Versailles. Many carried weapons. Others carried only one demand: bread. The journey covered more than 20 kilometers. By the time they reached Versailles, thousands of angry citizens had joined them. The palace that once symbolized royal luxury was now surrounded by ordinary people demanding justice. The following morning, violence broke out inside the palace. Several royal guards were killed as the crowd forced its way through the gates. King Louis XVI had no choice but to surrender. For the first time, the King and Queen Marie Antoinette were forced to leave Versailles. Escorted by thousands of revolutionaries, the royal family was taken to Paris. From that moment, the king was no longer truly free. Although he remained on the throne, he was now under the watch of the revolution. But Louis XVI still believed the monarchy could be saved. In June 1791, the royal family secretly escaped Paris under the cover of darkness. Disguised as ordinary travelers, they hoped to reach the eastern border, where loyal soldiers waited. For a short time, the escape appeared successful. But in the small town of Varennes, everything changed. A local official recognized the king from his portrait printed on French currency. The royal family was arrested before they could cross the border. Under heavy guard, they were brought back to Paris. The failed escape destroyed what little trust remained between the king and the French people. Many citizens no longer believed Louis XVI could lead the nation. Calls to abolish the monarchy grew louder across France. The revolution had now entered a far more dangerous phase. After weeks of debate, the convention reached its verdict. Louis XVI was found guilty. On January 21, 1793, thousands gathered in Paris to witness one of history's most dramatic moments. King Louis XVI was taken to the Place de la Révolution. There, he was executed by guillotine. His death marked the end of centuries of absolute monarchy in France. Only a few months later, Queen Marie Antoinette faced the same fate. On October 16, 1793, she too was executed. But instead of bringing peace, violence only increased. The revolution entered its darkest chapter. Under the leadership of Maximilien Robespierre, the government launched what became known as the Reign of Terror. Anyone suspected of opposing the revolution could be arrested. Thousands were sentenced to death by guillotine. Fear spread throughout France. Eventually, even Robespierre's supporters turned against him. In July 1794, he was arrested and executed by the very same guillotine he had used against so many others. The Reign of Terror had finally come to an end. Desperately needed. On November 9, 1799, Napoleon seized power in a coup d'état. The Directory collapsed, and a new government was established under his leadership. For many historians, this event marked the end of the French Revolution. The revolution had lasted for more than 10 years. It had overthrown a monarchy, ended centuries of feudal privilege, and transformed the political future of France. Its ideas reached far beyond French borders. Across Europe and the rest of the world, people began demanding freedom, equality, and constitutional government. The revolution inspired future movements for democracy and human rights. Its famous ideals: liberty, equality, and fraternity continue to shape modern societies even today. The French Revolution was not simply the story of a nation. It was the story of ordinary people proving that history can be changed.